Welcome to the Fundraising Elevator, where we're all headed up. This podcast is a production of ElevateNonprofit.com, an online learning platform for fundraising event professionals. We're coming to you today from the studios of the AV department. Please welcome our hosts, Kristen Steele and Samantha Swaim.
Welcome to the Fundraising Elevator and Happy New Year. We're so excited to have Tammy Zonker joining us today at the beginning of the year to kick us off.
Yes, 2024 in style.
In style. Tammy is going to be a keynote speaker with us at the Elevate conference in just a month's time. And we are so excited to have her here today to talk about something that I just love. It's something that I recommend to every nonprofit to consider, especially place-based nonprofits. Yep. And that is storytelling tours. It's this time where we have seen organizations detached from their donors, or everyone's looking for how do we reconnect to our donors.
And detached from their spaces as organizations too, right?
And so we've invited Tammy here today to sort of give us the big dream picture about what are storytelling tours. And then at Elevate, she's going to be there to give everyone more hands-on tactical application of how to apply, as well as really bringing some incredible content. So Tammy, welcome to the show. We're so glad you're here today.
Yes.
As we kick off, I'm going to pass it to Kristen to do an official bio, but I cut you off. Tammy, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I just could. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Love it. Love it. Love it. So Tammy is the host of one of our favorite podcasts.
It's true.
The Intentional Fundraising Podcast. We hope you'll tune in and subscribe. She is recognized as one of America's top 20 fundraising experts. Top 20.
I know.
Today.
She's like legit. We're
She's super
fangirling.
legit. Super legit. Hopefully we are by proximity. She is an inspiring international speaker and trainer in the discipline of transformational philanthropy. We love her for her masterful use of storytelling and her deep knowledge of major gift strategies. She holds so many titles, including AFP Master Trainer, Dean at the Institute for Charitable Giving, and an advisor at Capital Campaign Pro. When Tammy is not speaking at conferences or fundraising, she's leading webinars, online masterclasses, board and development team retreats, workshops, and coaching her online membership community of fundraising transformers. She is also one of our keynote speakers at this year's Elevate conference that we invite all of our listeners to attend. We will be spending February 1st and 2nd this year with her, diving into fundraising events. And Tammy will be joining us as a keynote speaker on how to engage and steward donors, and we'll be providing a hands-on session for what we are going to talk about today, and that is storytelling tours. So, Tammy, thank you for being here today as a little precursor, a little sort of dangling enticement, if you will, for the Elevate conference. And we want to talk about the magic tool that you introduced Sam and I to at the Nonprofit Storytelling Conference several years ago when we were all speaking there. And I looked over at Sam, and she was transfixed.
I was.
In a way that, we all go to conferences. And while it's good information coming in, sometimes it's just going in. But there was a shift happening for her, and that she was understanding and seeing an opportunity in a very real and different way. So storytelling tours, can you tell all of our friends listening, what is a storytelling tour?
I would be delighted.
Love it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. So a storytelling tour is essentially a free 1-hour tour of your mission. And that's an important distinction. It is not a tour of your campus, your facility. You're not going to show me the break room and the copy machine, right? It is all about your mission. And honestly, it's a great way to raise awareness about what you do and why it matters. Yep. It's a great way to show brand new donors, first-time donors, what they're supporting, or loyal donors up close and personal, how they're making a difference. And I'll just go on and on because it's a tool that can be applied in so many ways. It's an amazing way to introduce foundation gift officers, or maybe corporate partners or sponsors or programmatic underwriters, to see, again, up close and personal your work. And there's more. It is a great new employee orientation tool.
Oh.
Yeah. Or better yet. Yes. Better yet, why not have interviewees come through a tour?
Amazing.
And as a launch point, like, this is really what we do. And how do you see yourself being a part of this? It's a volunteer orientation, a new board member orientation, or even a board recruitment tool. So there's so many ways you can use a story tour or storytelling tour to really get the word out and connect with people.
I think that's so important, the connection. I feel like we've lost that the past couple of years, and we're at this like influx where the data's not good. We're hearing horror stories of losing donors. And you and I have talked about this before. I think we've been in this like state of crisis, not community, and reconnecting folks, bringing people back in. And I like just jotted down as you were introducing the idea of a storytelling tour of your mission. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you do that? Because immediately I go to like, here's our, service area, here's our education classroom, but that's a tour of your building. How does that translate into mission?
Yes, great question. So you really want your work to come to life. And at the same time, first and foremost, of course, we need to honor the dignity of the people who are engaging in our programs and services, right? To respect them so that they never feel like I'm on display here.
Right.
So you want to host your story tours at a time that's convenient for your community to come in, but yet not your peak hours for service delivery.
I think that's so important.
Yeah. And you want to be certain that when you're talking about the challenges that the people that you serve, what they're working to overcome, that those are shared in discrete places. So no one ever feels like we're talking about them. And so, I think that that's like a number one. But then where we go to once like, okay, we are all in alignment on honoring the dignity and respect of the people in our programs. Then we take a look at, okay, I want to share when people come into the tour, kind of a brief overview of our mission. What do we do? Why does it matter? This is a page from Tom Ahern and his great donor communication case for support. What do you do? Why does it matter? Why are you the organization to address this? What's unique about your theory of change, your process model? Because there is some duplicity in our communities, oftentimes amongst different organizations. So what sets you apart? And so we want to make that clear. So we also want to make clear why now. Why is our service delivery, the work that we do, important now? What's the urgency? Right? And maybe even what would happen if our organization went away? What kind of hole would it leave in our community? So that's kind of the welcome. Thanks for being here. Here's what we do and why it matters. And then we take a look at the programs that we deliver, kind of building off the rule of three. And we know from, good old marketing 101, we know from Dan and Chip Heath that the things that are packaged together in threes are stickier. They're more memorable. So you want to highlight 3 program areas. Now, I know some of our listeners might be thinking like, listen, Tammy, we have like 40 programs.
Right. Only 3.
Only 3. So you want these to be categories. So I'll give you some examples. I served for 9 years as the Chief Philanthropy Officer at the Children's Center in Detroit. And so a lot of the examples that I share around story touring are from that experience. So again, 40 some programs, but we were able to package them in 3 areas. Healthy start, making certain that kids had a healthy start in life, regardless of whether they lived in poverty, regardless of whether they had a perfectly loving home, but maybe that home had a family member that had a neurological difference or a learning disability or something like that. Or maybe a parent was incarcerated. So making certain that we could surround that child, that family, that nucleus, and make certain they got the healthiest start possible. So that's where we could talk about, preventative care. We could talk about the work that we did with teenage moms and helping strengthen those young families. The second area was healing the hurt, because unfortunately not every kid got a healthy start. So healing the hurt was the biggest part of what we did. So that could be, trauma treatment. It could be grief and loss. It could be abuse and neglect, the really hard stories. And yet these families are so inspiring. They're so resilient and dedicated to helping this child heal. So healing the hurt. And then the third area was safe home. And that's where we talked about foster care. The goal was always family reunification, but sometimes that wasn't possible. So we also talked about adoption services or independent living services for older youth who were in the foster care system and weren't great candidates for adoption, right? Like, so most 17-year-olds don't want to be adopted.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They want to be independent.
Yeah,
Right.
totally.
So those are examples from the Children's Center. I've also worked with Meals on Wheels, and their 3 program areas are often like nourishing the body, which is obvious, right? We deliver healthy, nutritious meals to homebound neighbors and friends. Enriching the spirit, because sometimes that volunteer delivery person was the only person that they spoke to on any given day.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then strengthening the community, like what it means to the community when people can age in place where they want to be.
Yeah.
So those are just, again, examples of how we can kind of compartmentalize the vast work that we do through our organizations.
May I ask a follow-up to that, because I can hear
Yes.
our nonprofit friends.
Yes,
Because
speak for them.
We all know that there sometimes can be a little tension between development and programming, right? So my question to you is, in those examples where you're for the narrative of development in this tour for sort of ostensibly cultivating these relationships, which we know serves the whole organization, including the program staff, but program staff gets sometimes a little twitchy and interested in how we're teasing apart programs, clumping them, talking about them. So in this development, was that something that was happening with program staff so that you had their buy-in and they felt a part of this piece? Is it something that was developed and brought to them and they were brought along? Like, sort of, what was that process like?
Yeah. I mean, the most successful organizations who integrate, develop, create, implement these story tours, there is close collaboration between the development and marketing folks and the program folks. The number one thing that's important is to make certain that we are aligned, our value alignment between programs and development. Because sometimes program folks can think those fundraising people, they're just all about the money.
Right.
Yep.
And I want to protect these families. I want to protect these children as they should. But we actually are on the same team. We also want to honor our families' dignity, to respect them, to tell the stories in the way that they want them to be told, to make them anonymous stories. Like, I'm going to tell you the story of, let's call her Jessie, let's call him Jack, when it's appropriate. So just to make certain that we are in alignment about how we talk about our work, that we talk about it in a strength-based way, which doesn't mean we don't talk about the problem.
Right.
But, here's what, when I work with, especially, I've spent most of my career in children's mental health, behavioral health, hospice. And when we talk about, the family, the challenge, it's important that we don't make the parent the villain.
Yeah.
The villain is poverty.
Yes. Yeah.
The villain is racism. The villain are the circumstances in which families feel so stressed that it creates this environment where trauma can occur.
Well, it's interesting because I think the thing that blew my mind when you were presenting for the first time this idea of a storytelling tour was that you were using story instead of a list of programs, right? So that idea of threes gives you the opportunity to tell 3 stories. and speak to also systemic issues or systemic villains out there in the world that maybe as an individual I want to impact, but it feels too big. It feels too overwhelming. And so it was this sort of like incredible blend of, as a donor, I could come and feel connected to your work, but I did not have to be a mental health expert to make a change in something as insidious as poverty. And so that little magic sweet sauce showed up when there was an invitation in, a connection to people in place by touring and being like in the physical space. And then the stories of the work really anchoring an individual in how they could have impact by giving, by volunteering, by being employed at this location. Like the power of the storytelling tour just like married all of those things together. So your opening statement about it's a tour of your mission is like just the aha. It is so brilliant to be able to say, instead of our mission is printed on the wall, no, we're going to show it in real life. We're going to show you what it is to be in the mission, which I just think is such a powerful tool.
Well, I'm happy to hear you say that. And just I want to underscore something that you said, to really create community and for people to feel like I don't have to be a mental health professional to make a difference. Part of that is not using jargon.
Yes.
Which is exclusive. Like it's exclusionary.
It's so alienating.
Language. Yes.
Well, and so I, as a person with a personal mission, trying to look for an avenue to align that with, when I go to a fundraising event, I know I'm going to be asked for money, right? And it's my understanding on these storytelling tours, there's not an ask. So
That's right.
Can you talk to us about how you finish, and yet the want is more action or more connection, right? So what did your conclusion to a storytelling tour look like, and how were folks invited in?
So I'll start with the conclusion.
Great.
So at the end of the tour, it is a conversation like the tour's 1 hour. Like it's been 55 minutes. We know that you have to go. You're very busy people, and we're busy too. As you heard, we're busy too. AKA like love you, bye, right? Because we don't want to, we want people wanting more when they leave so that they will connect. Either they'll return our call or they'll call us before we even have a chance to reach out to them. And so we say, it's been an hour. You've been so generous. We know you have a lot to do. We do too. My request is that you help us spread the word. Unfortunately, the issues that many of Detroit's children and families face, in our case, Detroit, are really not known. People think, gosh, Detroit's coming back. There are great restaurants. And they think that it's healed. And the truth is there's still so much work to do to unpack decades and decades and decades of poverty and racism and the stigma around mental and behavioral health. So your call to action to our listeners here today is help us spread the word for people to understand what we do, why it matters, and to intrigue them to come and learn more. So help us spread the word by inviting others to this tour. Now, so to your point, Kristen, there is no ask for money on this tour whatsoever. Although occasionally people will give you money.
Sure.
Right.
Of course.
We got a phone call from Keegan-Michael Key's agent. Of course, he's a great comedian and an amazing actor. And he was actually born in Detroit. He was put into foster care as an infant. And he says, I was one of the fortunate ones. I was adopted by a beautiful, loving family, as a baby before really any trauma could happen to me.
Right.
And so I want to give back in the city where I was born. And so he and at the time his fiance, they're now married, they took the tour. It was incredibly emotional. And they said, we want to give you $25,000. We have a foundation. We want to do that in honor of our wedding and our upcoming wedding. And so that sometimes people will give you money.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be a celebrity. It can be just friends and neighbors who just have that empathy and that compassion and really want to make a difference.
Well, and what a great active channel to plug folks into, meaning, often we're like, sign up for our newsletter.
Right.
And you're like, cool. Now I'm signed up for this newsletter. I'm not saying
Or email.
Or email. I'm
Right,
not saying
more email.
I'm not saying that's not great. But as a channel, we find and we know all of the psychology involved when people are talking to people and basing that in story and in a place, there's a different level of resonance that happens. And so just even this being a practice in an organization, having that as an available channel when someone calls. It could be a call like that, but it could also just be a call of somebody saying, hey, I heard about you guys. Can I talk to somebody? And it's like you have an immediate yes, I would love to have a conversation with you. How's this at this time? And it just gives, and it's better than do we want to sit at a table and stare at each other and be like, oh, who are you? Do you blah, 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 blah. There's something about us being able to bounce off of each other in narrative and that ability to open donors up to divulge their own narrative unsolicited in a way that when we're active listeners to that, as Peter Drury would say, story listeners, right? There were the storytellers and the story listeners, the more I get into this, the more I'm just like, this is so amazing.
This is it.
Yeah.
This is it.
Yes.
This is it. And you illuminate a point that I didn't make, and that is if I'm leading the tour, I start off by sharing why I do this work.
Yep.
The executive director, if they join for a bit to introduce themselves, maybe do the overarching mission piece, they share why they do this work. And in that sharing, there is an intimacy.
Yeah.
There is a relationship acceleration that happens. People would come in, they would shake your hand, but by the end of this tour, they're hugging you.
Yeah.
And as I walked them to their cars, to your point, Kristen, I had a gentleman, little salt and pepper in his hair, and he lingered after the tour as we were walking out to the parking lot. And when everyone else was gone, he shared with me that he had been sexually abused as a young boy.
Wow.
And so it's people, to your point, they see where does their narrative intersect with the narrative of these families, that whatever your work is, whether it was there, but by the grace of God go I.
Yeah.
I was one of the very fortunate, or I had, everybody, it's all relative.
Yeah.
For some children, trauma is I got my tonsils out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was scared. And for some children, I lived in domestic violence.
Yeah.
There were shootings on my street.
Yeah.
It's all relative. It's still trauma.
Yeah. You're also, I love the idea of fixed time. We're at 55 minutes. You've got a day, I've got a day, all of those things. Yet the generosity of an hour both ways is a very interesting thing to me, right? And people giving us that is important, but I also see that they understand us giving that to them being important, especially when they learn about the depth and breadth of work, that there's a generosity exchange there that tees up what could potentially come as well is a very interesting piece. We're also allowing people time to think and feel. Yeah. And we don't live in a world right now. Give me your email, I'll send you a newsletter. I'm going to send you a voicemail, a text, or whatever. We're not creating, and that's why we love events. You're trying to create a space to give people time to think and to feel and to be together. Yeah. And that the story tour does that as well. And I just think it's so good.
Well, I want to reflect on an episode of your podcast, Tammy. You did a podcast recently. I think it released in November with Paul Zak. And I want to encourage everyone to go back and listen to that. He's a neuroscientist that we reference his research all the time because it's so central in what we do with events. But you talked about the importance of immersive experiences and what immersion in something does to a donor to be able to feel that connection that deepens their investment in your work. And this is a storytelling tour is an immersive experience. You know, I think that I've had another organization who started to apply some storytelling tours. And one of the things that came out of it for them was their staff felt seen in a different way because their donors were coming in the door and being introduced to the front desk receptionist and introduced to the clinician. And all of a sudden their staff started sort of feeling some pride in the way that they were being introduced and connected to donors. And donors were asking them questions and invested in their work in a different way. So that immersiveness of donors aren't just coming in, you know, like you said, touring your building. They're not just walking through your space. They're connecting to your stories. They're listening to the importance of why you do this work. They're meeting people. And it feels to me like the salve we all need post-pandemic of how do we just hug each other again and say, come back. We're so glad you were a part of this work. Don't forget about us in a powerful way. So I think that is such a compelling reason to integrate storytelling tours into your work. But before we dive into how to do that, we're going to take a little promotional break. And when we come back, I want to ask you, because you are also such an expert in helping nonprofits navigate all of the sort of organizational tools necessary to be effective. I want to ask how to apply all of this. So we'll take a short break. We'll be back with Tammy in just a moment.
Loving the fundraising elevator, but wondering how you can talk to Sam and Kristen? Well, now's your chance to do it. Book one-on-one consulting time with Swaim Strategies experts Sam, Kristen, and Mary, and get all your event questions answered. Our team has you covered on strategic planning, fundraising strategy, storytelling, data tools, and registration support. Get the tools and the help you need to make the most impact at your fundraising event. Book at elevatenonprofit.com. The link is also in our show notes. Events have a unique power to create an immersive experience for your donors and your mission. That's why we created the Elevate Conference, to teach you the tools for planning a successful fundraising event. Join us for Elevate 2024 on February 1st and 2nd. This hybrid fundraising conference will be hosted at Avenue in Portland, Oregon, and broadcast online for a virtual audience. You'll get practical tools, demos, and templates you can implement right now. Join us. The Elevate Conference is a production of elevatenonprofit.com and is presented by Swaim Strategies and the AV Department. To find out more and register, visit elevatenonprofit.com today.
All right, welcome back to the Fundraising Elevator. We're here with Tammy Zonker. We're talking about storytelling tours. And we've talked a little bit about what they are, but I want to talk about how, because I think that nonprofits are very busy. You are such a skilled teacher when it comes to organizational systems and setup for development professionals. Can you talk a little bit about when someone listens to this and says, I want to start doing that? Where would you start? How do you begin to do this? How do you create a work schedule that makes this possible? What's the best starting point?
Yeah. So the first thing is, for it to live inside your organization, it needs to be systematized. It needs to be routine. Yeah. It's not an episodic event. It's once a month or twice a month on a consistent date and time forever. Don't take the summer off.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So for you, to apply that at the Children's Center, for you, you're blocking out your schedule Thursday afternoons, and you're having other people fill them in? Are you scheduling them? How are you launching that consistency to get people in the door?
Yeah. So we just schedule them on a repeatable date and time. And that's what we would encourage any of your listeners who want to embrace this. So is it the first and third Thursday of every month at noon and 5:30? And again, you want to pick times that are not peak hours for service delivery, because we don't want to intrude. When we tour, we're not going to tour a therapy session.
Right.
We're going to maybe walk in a therapy room that's empty and talk about the work, talk about what are some of the statistics about why people need therapy, the statistics around violence in communities or trauma that children experience, myth busting, kind of soul stirring, and frankly, kind of disturbing stats about the work that you do. And so we're in that space. We presence the need, the problem. We talk about the solution, what we bring, why we do this work, how we do it, and then we tell a story. Now, so that's how we presence it. That's kind of the immersion piece of it, and you want to make certain that you have some visual aids. So it could be the therapy room. It could be a teddy bear sitting in a rocking chair in that therapy room. At the Children's Center, we always had, like, some kids had sensory integration issues. And so there might be a sand table. And one of the stories we might tell would be of a little boy, we're going to call him Riley. And, he would be just meticulous in hiding all the scary toys, the guns that were in the room, the snakes that were in the room. He would put them under the sand and he would smooth it out so that everything looked fine on the surface, but it wasn't. And so we would use those visual immersive tools that are actually used in service delivery to illuminate that story, to have it come to life.
Now, you just said something that was an aha moment, because I assumed that you were always doing these one-on-one, but are you actually doing them in groups too?
Yeah, small groups.
Most often small groups? Or so, like, if you have a 12:30 slot, are you putting as many people you can into that slot, or is it a group that came together?
Yes and yes.
Okay.
So it could be like you can sign up on the website for our tours. We're gonna do a reminder call the day before, or maybe if it's an afternoon tour, a reminder call that morning. We're gonna have someone waiting at the front door to greet you and take you to the room where the tour starts. And sometimes you have a major donor, or you've got a longtime donor. Maybe it's someone who is not as mobile as, might not be able to keep up or feel comfortable in a walking tour. And so you're doing a private tour for them. Or maybe it's, Keegan. And, you don't want people fanning around him wanting signatures. And we worked with a lot of the Detroit Lions players and Detroit Pistons players. And so we would schedule one-offs for them. Sometimes we would have, a foundation who said, our board of trustees wants to come and we're doing a tour of the organizations that we have supported in the last year. And so they'll bring up literally a bus. And we'll do a tour with them. They will have, we'd like to have Panera delivered and then have some one-on-one conversations about the outcomes of the programs we funded. Beautiful. So that's a private tour. Yeah. But public tours, you could have 6-8 people. You don't want 24.
Right. You want it to feel connected.
And not like, surely all these other people are going to do something about this.
Yes, exactly. That's so good.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about, you said earlier, this is not a tour of your building.
Yeah.
However, access is an interesting thing. And I think donors getting access to where the magic happens is a very interesting thing. And so I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the importance of access to place or hypothetical place, like acknowledging that not everybody has a place where their work is happening. Can you talk about the difference of, like, literally a real estate tour and sort of how that tour of rooms and a geography can create an emotional geography for donors to participate in?
Yes. I'll give you 2 examples. So one, again, Children's Center, because I was there so long, I have lots and lots of examples from there. And it's mental health, it's privacy. So I think it's kind of an extreme example. So if we can do it there, you can do this.
Yeah, yes. Totally.
So one of the second stop on the tour was Healing the Hurt. And so we would go to our emergency crisis care center. So it's a place where first responders, EMS, even kids who showed up at the children's hospital with a psychiatric emergency who couldn't be seen in a timely fashion were put in an EMS and brought to the Children's Center Emergency Crisis Care Center.
Wow.
These were kids, I mean, they were having
Emergencies.
emergencies, like oftentimes suicidal or homicidal ideations.
Yep.
And so we would come to the entrance of that space, which of course all the spaces required the right access scanning code because it's all very, very secure.
Yeah.
And so I would say, we're about to go through our emergency crisis care center. And this is when I would talk about suicidal or homicidal ideations most often. It costs us about X amount to run this. The Medicaid reimbursement is less than half of that, but it's the right thing to do. And so we look to our community to help us bridge this gap because children and youth need these services. And so if you'll stay right here, I just want to go back in and make certain that we don't currently have any patients or any clients in crisis.
Yeah.
And so that was part of it. They got like, we are not going to walk in and jeopardize someone's well-being.
Right.
So that you can look and see.
It's your values in action, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we'd say, oh, thankfully, there's no one in crisis at this moment. Let me walk you through. And we would go into one of the rooms and we would showcase, like, notice that there's not a lot of furniture. Notice that the television monitors are secured by behind plexiglass. It's because often there's like a lot of emotion that happens in these rooms. I mean, if these walls could talk.
Yeah.
Right. In fact, let me tell you the story of Cody. And I would tell Cody's story. So I think that's how you tour space with respect. Mm-hmm. Or maybe, Cody actually is a real, it's a real story. And he was also an incredibly gifted artist, and he would do self-portraits that were very abstract. And we would say, like there was one where he had pre-pandemic, a handkerchief over his face. And half of his face was shadowed out. It was like a cloud was over it. And his therapist said, "What does this mean to you?" And he said, he explained the piece of art. He said, "I feel like part of me is disappearing, but I know it's the part of me that's not healthy."
Wow.
But I miss it. Like I'm losing part of myself.
Yeah.
So just how complex mental health and behavioral health can be. So that's one story of place-based. Now, there are a lot of organizations that have boring office syndrome.
Right.
Yes. So I think about the work. I was on contract for 2.5 years to help do some turnaround work with the United Way for Southeastern Michigan. And so I served as in a contract role as like their senior director of corporate philanthropy. And the goal was to shift workplace giving from transactional to relational, and from, kind of strong-armed giving into inspired giving through storytelling. And so literally all the work happened out in the community. The offices, there was all administrative, except for with one exception, their 211 help desk.
Okay.
Yep.
So, we would create tour stops. So if we were talking about early childhood development and high school graduation turnaround, we literally would walk into one of the conference rooms where we had some of our goals and our red, yellow, green, like are we succeeding on our key measurements, our key outcomes, and we would have an apple and a little peanut butter sandwich on the table, like a little school lunchbox. Or we would have children's books. And we would talk about the fact that in a typical U.S. home, average income, middle income, there's about 13 books for every child. In a community or in a home that is not wealthy, where they're living at or below the poverty. There's typically, on average, one book for every 13 children in that community.
Wow.
And so we would just, we'd have visual aids that would make it come to life. So you don't have to have a classroom that you can walk people in. You can have visual aids that have it come to life.
It's funny because you mentioned this is a way to like onboard new employees, onboard new volunteers. And we did an episode with Susan Howlett, who wrote, Susan. So she wrote Boards on Fire and talked about the importance of getting your board into the work of the mission. And she told some similar stories. She wasn't framing it as much as a storytelling tour, as much as an experience of the mission. But one of the stories she talked about was an organization that was environmental, and she would get the board out on a hiking tour. Another organization, mental health organization, that was bringing people into the therapy rooms so that they had that visceral connection. That I appreciate you say that you don't necessarily always have to have place, because I think that sometimes when our work is in community, we can actually go out into the community and witness the work happening too. So that is a powerful reminder. I think place is an underutilized value that people have, or resource that people have, because when I feel connected to place, it definitely feels like, wow, this is somewhere I belong. But understanding that place can also be the work in the community, the mission, or just the connection to where we physically show up and work every day. That's a powerful connection.
Yeah. Well, and I'm thinking too about, you were talking earlier about the idea of threes and stickiness. And I think bigger stickiness, what you're doing is you're providing people examples, a multitude of examples that they can resonate with at least one of them, right? It's like the lunch may not connect to me, the books.
Right.
Yeah. The lunch also connects to me. That's not what I'm saying. But you're providing a range. You're also providing them that lovely thing that a story does, which is a portable, shareable, emotionally connected thing that they can leave with. And if they get nothing else, they can be like, did you know that for every kid in sort of middle income and above, they can tell that story in a really visceral and quick way. And I think that's also what's amazing about these.
So when you've created this safe space environment for your guests to be able to come into, what's your responsibility back to the staff? I mean, they're sort of co-conspirators with you in this, right? They have to make space for you to be coming through their work environment. So what's your responsibility back to them?
Yeah, I think this is such an important question, because we as fundraisers, as community engagement managers, we're like, what's next? What's next? I'm booked back to back. And it's always like looking forward.
Yeah.
We have to take time to look back, to circle back to that clinician who shared the story, who gave us enough information and helped us get consent to share the story in the way that the program participant wanted it shared, in the format that they agreed to. And so to circle back and say, I just want you to know that that group of funders who came through, they talked specifically about the story that you helped us create. I want you to know that we were awarded a gift. Or, Keegan Michael Keys came through, and he and his wife gave us $25,000 because they were so inspired by you and the work that you do. And here's what I hear all the time, just from everyday people. I say, thank you. Like we do a thankathon, or we're thanking them. Thank you for caring, for your love and compassion for our children and families. And they'll say, listen, giving is the easy part. What y'all do, that's the hard part.
Yeah.
This is the least I could do.
Yeah.
And to let your program staff know that that's how our supporters feel about them.
Yeah.
Like they feel seen and heard and appreciated.
Yeah, it makes their story come alive in a very different way. When folks see the environment that your frontline staff are working in, understanding the obstacles they're up against, there is a really interesting connection that happens for them, and an elevation of their work by connection that you can't do another way.
It's funny.
Very interesting.
We get tours sometimes just because we're coming on board to be a partner to the nonprofit, that even if they don't have a formal system of a storytelling tour, they'll bring us through their space so we get to know what they do. And I had that experience. One of the warehouses we work with, they're a furniture warehouse, and they have like a welcome desk that their client comes to, and that door is open and closed a million times a day. And I happened to tour on a cold, rainy day. And the person that was sitting there greeting me was so sweet, and she was so cold that when we were cleaning out our office, we had an extra little space heater, and I took it over to her. So like even just the like connection to understand the environment she was working in, and now every time we see each other, like she's at events all the time that we produce, and she'll be like, my friend. And so there's that like connection that happens by people being in shared community together. And that's, I think, just something we've been so missing right now.
Yeah.
Yes, agreed. That connection is everything.
Well, I want to know about your board's role in this. What role did they play? Did they tour with you? Did they give tours? Did they fill your calendar with tours? What's their job in this?
Their job is to invite people to attend a tour themselves.
Okay.
And to invite others to attend a tour.
Okay.
And so, I mean, at the Children's Center, it was a really big deal. We were like, you know, if you're on the development committee, we want you to bring 2 or more people a month. If you are on the board, not on the development committee, you're on maybe a finance committee. We want you to bring, either host a tour where you're bringing 10 people, or bring 10 or 12 people a year. It could be all at once. It could be 2 a month. It could drip it out across 12 months, whatever works for you. Now, here's the thing. Probably half of them fulfilled that.
Uh-huh.
I think that's pretty much the case. Like, we want you to sell tickets to a gala. Half of them will do it.
Yeah.
We want you to get auction items. Half of them will do it.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that's pretty much on par, but we really want them to attend, and not just to attend once. You know, I said we want you doing these tours at least once a month forever. Your programs change. The community needs change.
Yeah.
And so it's important to refresh that tour and to have repeat people, board members, even donors or supporters or volunteers who've been through the tour previously, to come back, to give feedback on the changes, to learn more about how we're shifting and expanding or contracting to meet the community needs as they evolve.
Yeah.
I think that's the board role.
Yeah. That makes me think, did you have a mechanism, like an audit mechanism for you to understand when a refresh needed to happen? Did you have sort of like an episodic evaluation where you would be like, over this time, I just want to check in. How are we doing? Is this accomplished? Like, what was that system?
We definitely would evaluate the tour content at least once a year. But it was, here's the thing, we're fundraisers. So we're constantly being asked, like, oh my gosh, we need support for this. It's like, well, that's new.
Got it.
Tell us about that.
Yeah.
And so it was really like just the natural collaboration between program needs. It was like, ooh, flares, like things are changing. Things are, or unfortunately, maybe there would be a community incident.
Sure.
You know, whether it was violence in a school, and it was like, okay, we need to incorporate this into our tour.
Yeah.
Number one, to be relevant and to let people know we're part of the solution here.
Yep.
Not the exclusive solution. It's going to take all of us.
Right.
But we're part of it.
Yeah.
Well, you had some tremendous results, and I know that you're not currently at the Children's Center, but during your time there, this was a transformative program. What could this sort of program do for an organization? Yeah. So I've been gone. It'll be 3 years in May. I'm still a leadership level donor.
Of course.
Right.
Love them. Love them. So at the Children's Center, we had more than 600 tour guests a year pre-pandemic. When the pandemic hit, we shifted to a virtual tour. So it was not a recorded tour, like go to the link and watch it. It was still live.
Yeah.
But it was facilitated through Zoom. And even then we had over 300 people
Wow.
come through the tour. So what we saw was typically, especially with the in-person, about half the guests of the tour got involved in some way. Maybe they did a school supply drive or a food drive, or they went back to their company and said, we should include the Children's Center in our sponsorship or our corporate foundation support, come learn about it. Or maybe they got a volunteer group of young professionals to come and do campus beautification. Or what they're doing this week is the holiday shop, where we've done, you just can't, you're never done.
You're never done.
Well, you're a donor. You're still a we.
I'm still a we.
Yes.
So they get donations of brand new gifts, and boy, toddler boy, toddler girl, toddler gender neutral, teenager boy, teenage girl, gender neutral. And they will get like all of these incredible gifts and gift cards and pajamas and socks and underwear and blankets. And these amazing volunteers will set up a shop where families can come. They schedule a time to come shop for their family.
Amazing.
Because that parent or that guardian or that grandmother, they know whether, Jessie wants a doll with a pink dress or a yellow dress.
Yeah.
They know we also respect their dignity more.
Yes.
Because you want to know what your kid's opening.
Yes.
Right?
Here's a pile of wrapped things. Good luck.
Gifts.
Hope you like them. Yeah.
We're all going to be surprised on Christmas morning or however we celebrate. So just the fact that they could shop for every child in their family, not just children who are receiving services, because why is he so special? We wanted to mitigate all of that. And then they would take those packages to another room where volunteers were wrapping them.
Amazing.
And they got to pick Jessica would love the snowman wrapping paper, and, Kayla would love the Santa wrapping paper. So just beautiful, beautiful expressions of how people chose to get involved. But eventually, for those who eventually gave, their gifts were 4 to 5 times larger than people who had not been on a tour.
That's what I'm talking about right there.
4 to 5 times larger.
If you listen to nothing else today, that and we can go down all the psychology of that, but there is a real tried and true connection between immersion, connection, emotional connection, all of those things. And when you're taking a small group of people through and hearing stories of impact, all of a sudden those people feel like they can make an impact.
Yeah.
They're not reading it in a headline going, I have no idea what to do about the increased rates of mental illness in youth or whatever.
Again, I want to encourage listeners to go listen to the Intentional Fundraising podcast that Tammy did with Paul Zach. It is the thing I loved about that episode, Tammy, is that it was the nerdy neuroscience of what you're talking about.
The best.
It's
the best.
We can
He's
dream.
Brilliant.
He is brilliant. And we could dream of a 4 to 5 times larger gift, but you just showed us how to make that happen. Well, we're going to take a short promotional break, and when we come back, we want to hear a few stories from you, and then we're going to ask you to step into the fundraising elevator with us. So we'll be right back.
At Elevate, we believe in bringing people together. Our online learning platform for fundraising events has webinars, workshops, downloadable tools, and more, designed to save you time and stress when planning your next event. We're getting nonprofit, development, and event planning professionals the tools and ideas they need to create events that inspire donors and raise more money. So join us at elevatenonprofit.com. The link is also in our show notes. The Fundraising Elevator is recorded at the AV department in Portland, Oregon. For years, they've been our trusted partner, delivering exceptional audio-visual production and videography for nonprofits. In 2020, they transformed into a dynamic live streaming studio, producing more than 900 virtual and hybrid events. Now, we embark on an exciting journey together to bring you this podcast. Seeking the best in live events, video production, and live streaming, we proudly recommend our friends at the AV department. Link in the episode description.
Welcome back. We are so lucky to be here because we are talking to one of the best. Tammy Zonker is one of the best. And we continue to learn. We've had ahas in this podcast alone.
Writing all the
Sam's
notes.
furiously writing down notes. I've seen her tear up a couple times. This is good stuff, y'all. We are talking story tours and their potential for your organization to connect donors to your mission, to walk them literally through the heart of your mission. I'm wondering if you have any favorite stories of donors or folks who were on tours and sort of when those moments happened for them.
Mm-hmm. Well, one story comes to mind. I mentioned that I was on contract with the United Way for Southeastern Michigan for about 2.5 years, and we created a story tour there. And when we were approaching companies to come on board or renew their workplace campaigns, we wanted to meet with their CEOs, a C-suite person, and bring them on a tour.
Yep.
And so we called it the CEO visit. And, how we got these visits, you're like, well, that's nice. I don't happen to have the number of the CEO of General Motors. And so this is where we use, the tools and the strategies from good old major gift fundraising, peer-to-peer.
Yep.
So we had a campaign cabinet comprised of CEOs, executive leadership of some of the, biggest companies, or maybe not big companies. It was a kind of a diverse group, but they were definitely community leaders. They were passionate about giving back. And so this particular campaign cabinet at the United Way was chaired by a gentleman named Jeff Bergeron. And Jeff was the managing partner at Ernst & Young, downtown Detroit. And one of his big clients was General Motors. So he did have a relationship with the North American president of GM, and his name was Mark Royce, a really amazing individual. And so Jeff called, he got the visit. Mike Brennan, who was the CEO of United Way, he and I think one of the members of my team, who was like the account liaison for General Motors, we were invited. Jeff secured the visit. We were invited into Mark's office. And so we went into Mark's office, and, you got to know at the time, this was like 2010. GM was in bankruptcy.
Yeah.
Right.
That was a very specific time for them.
High school graduation rates in the city of Detroit on average with public schools were less than 30%.
Yep.
1 in 5 homes were what was in foreclosure.
Yeah.
It was a really tough time in Detroit.
Yeah.
And so Mark's lovely niceties, rapport building. And then he said, listen, we just laid off 10,000 people, as you know. And so we are going to do our best to run an employee campaign, but we have a lot fewer employees, and the employees that remain are nervous.
Yeah.
And they're doing the job of 2 and 3 people. So we're going to do our best. And of course, we're not in a position to give a corporate gift this year.
Yep.
And we said, well, thank you for addressing that head on. We appreciate that. But we're actually not here to talk about the campaign or a corporate gift. We really want to talk about the work that we're aiming to do here. And so we set out, like, our board, this United Way board has set a big, hairy, audacious goal 2 years ago to make Detroit a top 5 city to live and work by the year 2030. Mm-hmm. So in the face of those economic challenges, it's like, oh, really?
Tell me more.
Yeah, exactly. How do you plan to go about that? And so we talked about the fact that this courageous board who agreed to that, Mike Brennan, the CEO, his vision, the Mike Tenbush, who was the vice president of educational turnaround, like, these were really brilliant brave, courageous people. And they had found some funders, Kresge Foundation. If I start naming them, then I'm going to leave someone out.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Be careful.
But there were a handful of foundations that made some early investments so that we could pilot some of this turnaround work in 5 Detroit public schools. And it was working.
Yeah.
Like they were getting traction. And it wasn't just about stopping the hemorrhaging of high school graduations or high school dropouts. It was also about looking at the other end of it, which was that kids weren't showing up to kindergarten ready to learn.
Yep.
So there was that work around educational turnaround end to end. There was the work around making certain that Detroit families had access to healthy, nutritious food, because at that point in time, there was not a single grocery store
It was a food
in the city of Detroit.
Yeah. Giant food desert.
Exactly. Giant food desert with, it's the Motor City, but a lot of families didn't have reliable transportation.
Yeah.
The city of Detroit is $18 billion in debt. And so there are only half the streetlights work. A lot of the buses have broken down and they're not getting repaired. Like, here's the environment. So it's not like, so really the only place families can get food is at the liquor store, the gas station, right? And you know what kind of nutritious food you can enjoy from those places. And then helping families become financially stable, understanding, getting a bank account versus cashing their check at the liquor store, or worse yet, one of those pay advance places that takes. Yeah. So all that work. So the one ask, coming out of that meeting was not an ask for money. The ask was, come to our office. We want to take you on a tour of our work and showcase what we're up to and how we're doing.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that was the one ask. So about 6 weeks later, Mark and a few of his people, his scheduler, a couple of his people came, and we invited him in for the story tour. Now, the story tour is supposed to be like a casual conversation, but it is orchestrated like a space shuttle launch.
Yes, of course.
And so I'm like, what door are you dropping him off at? Let's make certain we have our 211 on the go cars there that happen to be GM cars that were donated by Roger Penske and had a nice United Way wrap. And so he came up. One of the first stop on the tour was the 211 help desk. He signed a confidentiality agreement. He put on a headset next to the call handler, and he heard people calling in. And there was a gentleman who was calling in. He came back from a doctor's appointment, and he had been locked out of his apartment. He was evicted because he had to choose between prescriptions and paying his medical bills and paying his rent. And so, Mark was moved by this. We moved him. Then second stop was our what we called the war room. And that was all about our high school turnaround, the education programs. And he was enthralled by it. And we said, we're working to turn around the city of Detroit, just like you're working to turn around General Motors. We need your thought leadership. We need to know what you know. We need your candid feedback, because here's what's not working.
Yeah.
And we started talking about what's not working. And the more vulnerable we became, the more vulnerable he became. He said, and this moved me. He said, at GM, we've lost our soul. We have forgotten who we are, but we are going to come back. We're going to make it up to the city of Detroit. We're going to make it up to Michigan, to this nation. We are going to come back. And the one ask coming out of that tour was not for money. It was, would you like to tour one of our turnaround high schools? And so fast forward, like this tour, I think was in July. School started up in September, so it was early fall. He came to a tour of Cody High School, and that tour, he walked through the same metal detectors that every student walks through. It was an authentic immersion experience, just like Paul Zach talks about. And then we went into the library. There were principals who shared their stories of why they are so dedicated to these kids and this turnaround work and the progress that they've made with this early investment and the United Way turnaround approach. And then 3 students came in and told their stories. And I will just say there was not a dry eye in the room.
Oh, I bet.
Of course.
I bet.
Yeah.
Of course.
And so at the end of that exchange and that storytelling and that immersion experience, the principals left, the students left, and all that was left remaining was Mike, our United Way CEO, Jeff Bergeron, who was at every one of those experiences, every one of those visits. Again, peer-to-peer dedication. Our Mike Tenbush, our VP of Education, and myself. And I had the privilege of walking Mark through, because at the tour at the United Way, he said, I'll come to the tour at your school, but I want to see a proposal for what would it take to turn around 5 more schools.
Wow.
And so I had the privilege of walking him through line by line by line the proposal for turning around 5 more schools through investing, creating 5 new early learning communities aligned with the schools that they would choose. And where those schools were, of the 30 schools, where were the 5? How did they map up to GM locations for volunteerism, for job shadowing, for mentoring and tutoring and all of those things? So I walked line by line through that proposal, one of the greatest privileges of my life. And then, of course, Mike Brennan, the United Way CEO, he said, so we're asking you to make an investment of $27.1 million in United Way's turnaround work. And then Mark is like looking at it. He's shaking his head. There's so much silence. And then he said, yes, let's do it. I have no idea how we're going to do it, but we are going to do this. And then there was more silence because we forgot to rehearse what to say if he said yes. And then he turned to me and he said, Tammy, I'm looking to you to leverage this gift with the other autos and the suppliers.
Yeah,
You're
you
not
are.
in this alone.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah. So fast forward, it was in early December that that GM pulled out of bankruptcy, went back on the New York Stock Exchange, and then we held a press conference at one of the schools, and Mark and one of the students who had been on the tour announced the gift. We did a big press conference. It was extraordinary.
That's amazing.
Congratulations. That is
There
really
is
amazing.
so many levels of expertise and brilliance in that. The thing that I want to underscore is that scale is insane, right? That scale is so great.
That size of giving.
That size of giving.
Impact.
Regardless of dollar amount, is possible. And it's possible because you had a mechanism to tell your story in that way. It wasn't like you got the meeting and were like, oh my goodness, how are we going to do this? What are we going to? You knew exactly what you were going to do. You had the meeting and you knew what the ask was. Come take a tour. Just like the ask is for anyone else. And so that's what I leave with, is when you build the mechanism, you have that place to plug people in for the magic to happen versus reverse engineering.
Yeah, I love that distinction, and I will say it's the process of the story tour when it meets extraordinary generosity and extraordinary leadership.
Yeah.
Okay, so it. I don't want to take anything away from Mark and his team and his
absolutely
board.
not.
And that was one of the most profound fundraising experiences of my life. And I acknowledge them. But yes, having that mechanism, that tour to authentically engage people, it just gives them the space to be as extraordinary, like the highest, most extraordinary version of themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't wait for you to be at Elevate.
I
And I
know.
can't wait for everyone listening to also be at Elevate, February 1st and 2nd.
Join us,
Join it.
elevatenonprofit.com.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Can't wait.
Tammy's going to do a deeper dive, because I think that the piece that we've asked of Tammy is, how do we give everyone the tool to apply this? Because it is something that I think everyone should be thinking about utilizing in their development plan, And while it feels like it could be really time consuming, I feel like the reward is so deep and so intense and is, like I said, that like connection back to people. So I hope that folks will join us so that you can get kind of that hands-on tutorial and apply. Also, we're going to talk stewardship. We're going to talk bringing donors back into the organization. Yep. And Tammy, we just so appreciate you being here. But before we leave, we asked all of our guests to step into the fundraising elevator. And we asked 2 questions that we wanted to close with. One is, heading up to the penthouse where there's a fun party, tell us a little bit about a great event that you've been to and what made it great.
Yeah. So where I went to was like one of the big galas with the live music and the fabulous food and, all the people. That was like the first place I went. And I thought, that's actually not my favorite fabulous event.
Right.
My favorite fabulous event comes from the Children's Center, and it was the holiday gratitude reception that we hosted annually. And it was a family event. It was multi-generational. So we had, some of our more mature, seasoned, long-time loyal supporters and their adult children who were also giving, and they were invited to bring their children, and there were holiday crafts, and there was like heavy hors d'oeuvres and signature cocktail and all of that for the adults, but there was like this little mini kid-friendly food. And just,
awesome.
It was like family.
Awesome.
It was so lovely. And we had a photographer who took family photos by the donor recognition wall, and we would print them and frame them quickly so they could take them with them.
Amazing.
That's awesome.
And some would say, I don't need the frame. I'm just going to put it in front of the one that I took last year.
There you go. That's
So
good.
it was just so sweet. A few words from the CEO and board chair about how much we loved them, the donors, the supporters, and how they were helping move the needle in the community. And that was of course, where we unveiled the updated donor appreciation wall each year. So it was like family. It was just a family-friendly, loving event.
That's awesome.
I love it. It's all the tools for bringing people back into the work. Well, so if we think about the tools and we head down to the boiler room, what's a tool that you think every development professional should have in their toolbox?
Well, it's kind of, I'm kind of going to cheat into a big run-on sentence.
You go.
You have to like people.
Yes, it's true.
That is right there, mic drop, truth. The big truth.
Whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, you have to have a love of people. You need to be a good listener. You need to be curious. You need to ask great questions. I think sometimes we think we have to have all the answers and say everything perfectly. No, ask great questions. Really listen. Yeah. Be curious and like people.
It's so important and so overlooked in professional fundraising.
Yes.
Well, Tammy, you're brilliant. We appreciate you. There is actually a little video we're going to include for our YouTube viewers, a little link to the video that you have on the Children's Center website of you doing a tour, because I go back to that all the time. It's so moving and it just kind of brings everything together. So if folks want to click on that and check that out, we'll be sure to include it. Where can people find your podcast?
Yes. So wherever you consume podcasts, you will find the Intentional Fundraiser podcast.
All right. So it's our favorite. I listen to you on walks every day. I love when a new episode comes out, and you always have such incredible content. I learn all the time. So I encourage everyone to tune in. And how do people get a hold of you if they're interested in understanding more about your work?
Yes. So you can connect with me at Tammy, Tammy, at fundraisingtransform.com. You can go to our website, fundraisingtransform.com. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. Although I am an introvert, I'm not hiding out online. So you can find me.
Okay. And we will put links to all of those in the show notes.
Thank you.
Tammy is also offering listeners a special early bird offer through January 15th to the Intentional Fundraising Plan Masterclass that you can check out on fundraisingtransform.com. Thank you for providing that. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. We will see you in February.
Yeah.
Thank you for being on today and joining us. And Happy New Year to everyone.
Happy New Year to everyone.
Happy New Year. Thank you.
Thank you.
The Fundraising Elevator is produced in partnership with Swaim Strategies at the studios of the AV department. The program is produced by April Clark and directed by Steve Osborne, with audio engineering and original music by Dwayne Anderson and Heidi Christensen. Video production by Chris Peterson, Whitney Gomes, and Nathan Bouquet. Video editing by Steve Osborne. Graphic design by Pendulum Creative Group, and support from Sophia Keller, John Lyles, and Andy Dowsett.